George Wacker. He was born here, lived his entire life here, and died here. There was no other place he would rather have spent his life than right here in Siskiyou County. Dad was born in 1912 to Michael and Rosa Wacker. He was the last of several children: Louis, Hilda, Bernard, Judith, and Matilda. Although Louis was a lot older than Dad and lived away from Yreka for much of his life, he spent the last of his years here, and he and Dad were very close. Sadly, Dad didn't know his sister Hilda well. She was away in school when Dad was growing up. She became a nurse and died on her honeymoon in the Bay Area at a young age. Matilda married Frank Rausch, a baker, and moved to the Sacramento area. Judith married Norman Colson and also moved away. Dad often spoke of Norman as being more like a brother than a brother-in-law. His brother Bernard was the only sibling to learn German, something that Dad always wished that he had done. Bernard took over running the store when their father died, but Bernard also died at a young age, leaving a teenage George to run the family business. Wacker's Fine Foods became an icon in Yreka. Dad was known for his generosity and his good service. He would not only deliver your groceries, he would take them to your kitchen and put them away for you if you wanted. Dad married his high school sweetheart Ethel. They had 2 boys, Mike and Louis. Later, he married Frances Urbach. She brought 2 children to the family, Normalie and John. Then, much to their surprise, they had me. So we were a yours, mine, and ours family. There are so many stories of Dad growing up in Yreka. He remembered when the first automobile came to town. He remembered watching townfolk burn the Kaiser in effigy at the end of World War I. He remembered buying fireworks in Chinatown and almost blowing his hand off when he tried to hold a Roman candle. He remembered his mother always having a hot pot of soup on the back of the stove, something delicious to warm you up after a cold walk home from school. Of course, sometimes you had to separate the fact from the fiction. Dad was fond of saying that sometimes the truth needed a little help to make it more interesting. So there were the stories of baby bears he played with, not true. Babe Ruth he played baseball with, true, in 5th grade. His father pushing a fruit cart down the street in Chicago, and that's why the street is called Wacker Drive. Who knows? Wrestling a bear on Main Street, true, and even a pet rattlesnake named Oscar. You figure that one out. Dad had a passion for Siskiyou County, and for Yreka in particular. He would travel from time to time, but never very far and never for very long. On several occasions, when Mother would ask if he'd like to go to Kansas with her to visit her relatives, his answer would be, "That's okay, I've been there." His idea of a great trip was driving around the county with family or old friends, just seeing the local sights. All of us kids endured Sunday afternoon drives. He always wanted to help this area be the best it could be. He was the youngest mayor Yreka had ever had and was county supervisor for 12 years, running unopposed in his last elections. On retirement, one of the local papers wrote of losing the last of the honest politicians. I like to think of him not as a politician, but as a statesman, someone who is in office because he wanted to work for the betterment of his community, not for personal gain. But you can't talk about George Wacker without talking about his sense of humor. From putting Groucho Marx glasses on his newborn daughter, to putting a sign on his vacationing friend's yard, "Leave all your old Christmas trees here," to inappropriate dalliances with snow maidens. I'm sure each of us can add a story, a joke, a magic trick. My hope is that this will spark your memory and you will share a story or a special time. I know Dad's listening and enjoying every minute of it.
When I was your age, I grew a garden for the family, and I became real famous for my big, good-looking vegetables. But I became actually more famous than anything for my watermelons. Boy, could I grow some of the biggest, sweetest, juiciest, reddest watermelons you ever saw. But I had one big problem. Do you know what that problem was? Well, I'll tell you. My watermelons grew oh so fast and oh so big Being big was no problem, but growing fast was a real problem. Because do you know what would happen when the vines would grow so fast? Well, I'll tell you. The vines would grow so fast that they would drag the big watermelons over the ground, and as the vines pulled the large watermelons over the ground, it would wear holes in the bottom of the watermelon where it's dragged over the rough ground, and the juicy part of the watermelon would leak out onto the ground. Well, I knew I had to do something, so you know how I solved the problem? Well, I'll tell you. I built a whole bunch of little wagons, and I put one wagon under each watermelon. And after that, when the fast-growing vine would pull the watermelon over the ground, it would just pull the big, juicy, sweet red watermelon along on the little wagon, and it wouldn't bother the watermelon at all. And that solved the problem with wearing holes in the bottom of the watermelon. And boy, that summer we enjoyed the biggest, the juiciest, and the sweetest, and the reddest watermelons you ever saw. And everybody was so happy because I put wagons under my watermelons so they didn't wear holes in the bottom of them. Well, that's all I had to tell you right now. So I'm going to say goodbye again. And I sure love you. Goodbye for now.
Thank you for being here. This is a joint program put on by Yreka Preservation, who are the people that maintain this beautiful church, 140 some years old. Hope you all appreciate this and you use it a lot. And the Genealogical Society of Siskiyou County. And Pat Williams wants to come up and talk a little bit about that. And then I will go on, give you more of an introduction. Kim and I are going to tag team on some of this. And so, again, thank you for coming, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the program.
Thank you, Mike. I just wanted to say thank you to everyone for coming. This is quite an honor to have this program here today. It's really great that Preservation let us use the facilities here, because it is a terrific place to come. So anyway, everyone enjoy it, and thank you for coming again.
Probably should talk about some of the real important things, like where the restroom is. So if you need to have a handicap restroom, Claudia East right here can help you. It's around in the courtyard in the back. If you just need to go to a regular restroom, you go through that doorway. We will excuse you to go through in front of us. And you go down the steps and you will see the lighted rooms of the restroom. You will find it. If you have the desire, I'm sure you will find it. So, okay. So, again, thank you for being here. Wow, I'm excited about this. George Wacker, Mr. Yreka. And for any of you that knew George Wacker, I think you would say that was a very appropriate name for him. He was, in my mind, the descriptions of what I know about him and heard about him go on and on. Great storyteller, very interested in the community, great friend, supportive person, goes on. So thank you for being here. A little bit more of the background. You may have seen that there was a bowl in the back that had some dollar bills and maybe even bigger denomination in there. The purpose is to try to maintain things like this. If you would like to donate, no one's going to knock your hand away. On the other hand, if you would like to donate your time in service to either this organization or the Genealogical Society, Yreka Preservation, they would really, really love that. So keep that in mind. Always appreciate people that try to help out. This is the first of a series of programs that we will be working on. This is George Wacker, of course. But there are some very important families that still have family members in the Yreka area. And what we wish to do is try to have programs about them. So I'll just throw out some of the names. How about Churchill? Wow, they've been around here forever. Churchill. How about the Eddies? They've been around here forever, still have family members. How about, I just found out that there are family members of the Silverhearts. Remember them? How about Fairchild? Are there still some Fairchild family members around here? We'll look into that some more. The Russell family. There are family members around here. They were a prominent family. Agers, that's part of my family. So maybe we can do something about them. McMurray, Earl Cummings, Ray Manley. These are some of the names that we will be looking into. Dylan. If those sound familiar to you, that means you've been around town for a while. And keep listening because we're going to have more programs. Okay, so I don't want to talk forever, but I think I did my introductions. I think that Kim and I were talking about wanting to introduce our families a little bit. Should I start? Judy Washington, right here. If you went to school, you probably went to school under Judy Washington. Well, not all you. The younger people. I didn't mean the real old people. So she is a second cousin of mine, and I am connected to the Whackers because, let me see. My family was part of the Walter, like Walter Lane family, and the Whackers married into the Walter family. So I guess I'm third cousin of George Whacker. I'm guessing, something like that. Anyway, okay, but my mother is a little bit closer. This is Norma Geyer, used to be the county clerk right up here. And so she is, I'm guessing, second cousin, Mom, don't you think? Pretty close. Yeah, that's close enough. Everyone's connected somehow. So that's the family members from my side. Now we get to hear about the Whacker side.
Sadly, none of my siblings could make it, but I luckily have some other relatives. I have a niece, Christina and Leanna, and Christina's son, Mason, are here. I have my son, Pat, and my husband, David. He's the one with the camera there. I have my nephew, John, and his wife, Julia, his son, Ethan, and his girlfriend, Fatima. And, you know, there's a whole lot of other family members out there that I see. You're just not related by blood. But you know who you are, and I thank you all for coming. It's just so nice to see so many faces. I hope I didn't leave anybody out. Are you ready for me to just continue where I was? Or? Whoops. I, too, want to thank you all for coming. I'm really overwhelmed to see so many familiar faces, so many faces. Before I forget, this is being filmed, and as soon as this is over, it'll be uploaded to YouTube. So if you have a family member who couldn't be here, let them know, and we'll have a link for you. So it'll be great. I was told to tell you it's being done by an amateur, so no comments. Just just know it'll be there somehow. Well, I want to tell you a little bit about my dad. And first of all, I was online. I think it was Facebook, so you know it has to be true and accurate. When I discovered that the name Whacker has Austrian and Swiss German roots, which is appropriate, but it refers to the name Whacker refers to a person who is bold and energetic. I had to think about that for a while, and I thought, well, that certainly describes my paternal grandfather. Mike Whacker came over from Austria at a young age with only the clothes on his back and his shoe repair kit. He worked his way across the country. You heard a little bit of the stories. My dad had several stories about his adventures across the country, but he eventually landed here in Yreka, where he raised a family and became a respected businessman. So that definitely, I think, is bold and energetic. Now, as a child, I might not have seen this, but as I look back,
I think my dad could be described as bold and energetic as well. As it said in the early video, when Dad's father died of cancer and then his older brother died, Dad had to give up any thought of college and take over the family business. And he lost his first wife tragically, and then a few years later, his mother died as well. He had an arthritic spine, poor circulation, varicose veins, what we now call restless leg syndrome. He was in pain most days and slept very little. Oh, and there was that bout of tuberculosis that put him in a TB hospital in Reading for 10 months. But none of that stopped him. During all those times, he kept his business going. In fact, he grew it. He bought another store in Montague, other than Whackers here in town. He started several side businesses, from selling eggs to shipping out Christmas wreath kits. Those were very popular in Hawaii, by the way. And we still have the Whacker boxes. He was a real estate agent and a writer. And in addition, he was involved in just about everything that went on in Yreka. If there was a club or an organization, he belonged to it. He was also Yreka's youngest mayor and later county supervisor. And yet, growing up, I never once heard him complain about the hard life he had lived or the unfairness of it. The only thing I heard all the time was how lucky he was to have been born and raised right here. Well, I think bold and energetic describes him pretty well. But another thing you need to understand is my dad did love Yreka. He loved Siskiyou County. He loved Northern California and was so grateful to be here. I shared it in the earlier video that when my mother would want me to go to Kansas, nope, I've been there. And I know he and one of his friends would take off and go on these trips just to see how things looked in the county. And they'd spend who knows where and what they were doing, but that was his idea of a good vacation, driving around the county. My dad was also a storyteller. When my mother put me to bed, she would read to me. But when Dad put me to bed, he would tell me a story. And now some were pure fantasy, but others were about him growing up. My favorites were the bear stories. He had so many bear stories. There were quite a few of them, and all different. And one of my favorites can be found. You will find some of these books in the back being sold by Jennifer Bryan, but in his second book, it has one of my favorite bear stories in it. But there were a lot of them. Another favorite story I had were the stories he would tell about Uncle Josh. I loved Uncle Josh. He was the funniest guy. He was always getting in all sorts of scrapes, and he was just my favorite uncle. Well, shortly after my dad died, I suddenly started thinking about Uncle Josh, and I asked my mother where Uncle Josh fit into our family. And, well, my mother looked at me with this funny look and said, "Kim, there was no Uncle Josh. Your dad made him up." I felt like I'd lost my favorite uncle. And I knew that some stories weren't true, like playing baseball with Babe Ruth. Of course that's not true. Well, the story about that's in the first book. It's back there. Yep, it's true. And he also did wrestle a bear down on Main Street. However, wrestling is a loose description of what really happened, and that story is also in one of the books. Dad loved sharing the history and the area of this area that he loved. He was delighted when asked to do programs or make videos. His history and other stories were recorded and were played a lot on the Yreka local access TV station. In fact, almost every time when I would come home, I would turn on the TV and there'd be my dad on TV. It was really kind of fun to see. They can be found on YouTube, and I put some addresses back there. There's a little table in the back with pictures and newspaper articles, and there's some little slips of paper that have this address, youtube.com/@Siskiyou Media Council 4603. And you can find several of Dad's videos on that. So grab one of those little pieces of paper if you want, and you can check out some of those fun videos. Another way to access his stories is through the two books. About 2 years ago, I compiled just a book of his stories. And after I was done, my younger brother, Louis, some of you knew Bub, said, "Oh, how come you didn't include these? And he sent me a whole bunch more. So, second book came out this year. So there's 2 books of my dad's stories. You can find them on Kindle or print version on Amazon. And as I said, Jennifer Bryan has a few back there. Proceeds go to the Yreka Genealogical Society, so all your money goes there, including what you buy on Amazon. Well, Mike and I talked about me reading one of my dad's stories, but I couldn't come up with one. There are so many things I could say. My nephew Jack wanted me to remember the fact that he was a magician because he was always teaching magic tricks. I thought for years he could stick a dime inside his arm, and my cousin Fable wanted me to remember his sense of humor and all the funny tricks he used to play. My boys remember him out teaching them how to pan for gold. But there were just too many. I couldn't think of one story to share. So I decided to share a poem that he wrote. Yes, my dad also loved poetry. There were lots of poetry books in his library. And it was just recently that I discovered that he had actually written a poem of his own. It's called Siskiyou County. So I'd like to end with this poem. When memories keep me company and moves from smiles or tears, a grand county close to my heart looms through the mist of years. I marvel at the craft that carved this rugged place and marvel at the pioneer that tried to change its face. To those who treated it with love, it has been gentle and kind. To me, it has been the place the ancient mariner tried to find. From where it stands today to where I stood as a boy, it is a space of time filled with golden moments that I treasure with great joy. I love this great county and its people with all my simple heart. And for the history that has shaped it, I am glad to have played my part. Thank you. We're now going to ask other people to share if they'd like. We're going to start with any family members that would like to share. If you would like to share, you do need to come up front, because even if you have a loud voice, the camera can't pick you up, and we want to make sure that everyone can hear and everyone can see. So if you have something to share, you can come up and sit up here in the front if you want, or you can just sneak up when it's time. But we're going to let family members share first. Do we have any family members who would like to share? Here comes Leanna. Yeah. I have your dad's. Should we do it first, or do you want? Oh, okay, good. No, I'm glad you did that. Good. Okay. I had to correct spellings in my dad's book, too.
Okay, is it better just to hold? Yes. Okay, so hi everyone. My name's Leanna, and I'm one of George and Frances's grandkids. And I just think, before I get started, I just want to say this is from my dad, who I think kind of took a page from George Wacker's book and recently wrote his own story, which, sorry, I didn't expect to get emotional, but I need to publish, so thank you for the inspiration, Kim. Anyways, this is actually from my dad, and he wrote it just for today. So he says, and he's known as Bub, that was his nickname, so this is Louis Wacker. I remember when I was about 5 or 6, approaching the end of the day, Dad would say, "Hey, you want to go for a ride?" We would answer with an enthusiastic, "Yes," and we would all pile into the car. It was always a big deal, and gas was only 25 cents a gallon. We might stop and get a Frosty Freeze ice cream cone. Then we might drive to the cemetery or to the intersection of North Oregon and Maine, where he'd wrestled a bear as a boy. I guess we're going to hear that story a couple of times. Or we might go to Yreka City Park, which he said was the old fairgrounds. The rides would happen off and on over the years. When I was a teenager, the two of us would drive down the Klamath River. When I got back from basic training, and he was in Vietnam, I had 2 weeks before heading to Vietnam. During that time, we took a long drive to Crater Lake. He knew I'd always wanted to go there. After I got back from Vietnam, our ride took us to Con Brown's. Who's Con Brown? Con Brown's for coffee with some of his old friends. We'd enter through the back door, Dad's main entrance there. Sometimes while sitting in my recliner, I hear a voice, "Hey, do you want to go for a ride?" And I answer with an enthusiastic yes. 1 minute. If I could share a little thing about, okay. I wanted just to share a little thing about Grandpa George, because he mentioned the watermelon story, and I don't know if this is in one of the books. I started to read it, but I haven't finished. I just thought it was a funny thing that came to mind. So at the Wacker grocery store, my grandpa told me a story about how they would have these watermelons, and they needed to sell them because they would go bad if they didn't sell them in time. And he thought, well, seedless watermelons will sell better. So he cut them in a way that the seeds wouldn't show and put them in the window, marketing them as seedless watermelons. And he thought that that was a great trick. A couple of other things that I remember about my grandpa was he was kind of, in general, I would say a trickster, but in a very kind and gentle way. He would tell me things like, yeah, when your grandma and I are in the hot tub and she's not looking, I like to make the water splash up so it hits her face, and she thinks it's the hot tub, but it's really me. And I'd go to the garage, and we'd come to visit. I'd go to the garage, and when you enter in the door, he'd hang this little motion detecting fuzzy thing that would bounce up and down, going, ah, and laugh as you entered. So it's a good way to get the grandkids a good scare. Yeah, a couple other things, like he'd say he'd like to pick us up by our ears. And then I was like, okay. And then he would actually like try to pick us up by our ears. But in a gentle way. It was always like just funny. He'd pull quarters from our ears. He gave me this rock, and I think he gave it to both Christina and I, but it was rubbed smooth, he said, just because it was his good luck rock, and he would always rub it. I mean, I think it was really just a polished rock, but he was able to, like, just put a little spin on things to make things feel magical. And that rock was his good luck rock that he wanted to share with us. So little things like that. He would take us out to get root beer floats at the local, it's like kind of, yeah, that's right. But it's like the local hunting store. And we'd sit up at the bar and, yes. And I just remember feeling so special because everybody knew Grandpa. Everyone knew my grandpa. And, hey, George, how's it going? And so we would drink our root beer floats and hear them talk about, local things. And but it was nice to feel like, oh, my grandpa is someone that people know and love in this community. And that's kind of my takeaway. Is it's a good example for kids to see that they have a family member that is dedicated to the community and what that brings, not to just to the community, but to the family. So that's my bit I wanted to share. Thank you.
Take this. Family.
Well, I wasn't planning on coming up here, and I just thought of a story. I'm John Kenyon. Some of you might know my mother, Norma Kenyon. She taught here for a few years. Frances was her mother, so Grandpa George wasn't my blood grandfather, but he sure made me feel that way. I mean, it was just, there was no difference. He was Grandpa. That's the way it was. But I remember back when I was a kid, he'd take us up to go gold panning. So we'd go up, we'd go up on a hill somewhere. They say he owned this gold mine up here. And we'd dig a couple of buckets, we'd come back to the house. And then we'd gold pan and gold pan and gold pan and a little bit here. And eventually we'd see flakes of gold in there. Many, many years later, I found out that he had a little bottle of gold flakes that he would sprinkle in there to make you think you found gold. And it's just one of the things that made him so Mr. Yreka, if you will. Thank you.
Again, I'm Mike, and a third cousin. And I didn't know George very well at all. I grew up out on the Fort Jones Road, and my grandmother lived out there, and they were first cousins. And so when I did have interaction with George, it would be when he would come out to see my grandmother, and I was there also. And I remember him as being an extremely dapper, gentlemanly, considerate, kind individual from my interactions with him that way. Later on, as I've become more interested in local history, I really appreciate what he has done, what he did in the way of exploring local history. If any of you have checked out any of the things on YouTube about like when Greenhorn Reservoir drained, you know, and he was right down there in it talking with the engineers about everything. I mean, and he was very interested, but he was very connected with people. And that's, it seems like to me that's one of the things that we have to think about with George is he knew everyone, he knew what was going on. And the other thing I will say is that what I really admire about him looking back is what his family has alluded to many times, his storytelling ability. And I think it's generally accepted here in this society that that is an art form that is dying, if not dead. And I think that's too bad. Because think of all the great stories that George told. I mean, in his books, by the way, the books are for sale back there, or to his family. Lights on. Did you lose my voice? I'm sorry. I will continue. That got your hearts beating, didn't it? Okay, so that was being said is my personal experiences are fairly small, but on the other hand, several people encouraged my grandmother as she was getting older to write stories about her life. How many of you have done that, by the way, so that you can pass them on? Wow, I don't see hardly any hands open. What's going on here? Not only have our ability to tell stories dying, but our ability to write is dying? What's going on? Okay, you should, because those will be fascinating to other people in the future. And so I really encourage you to do that. She did it, and my grandmother did it, writing about her first cousin. And so I took excerpts from it. And as I was talking with Kim, she told me, well, you know, Mike, part of what about George was not true. For instance, she started off by saying he was a German bartender that moved to Yreka. That was Mike Wacker, his dad. And you said he was from Austria and he wasn't a bartender. So other than that, it was all right. But that's a lesson for genealogy or historians, is don't believe everything that you read, right? Okay. So it goes on to talk about some of his family. I don't know if I need to do that. But how we are connected with the Wackers in that Mike Wacker, George's father, married into the Walter family. And that's how I'm connected. Talks about how his first wife, there was tragedy, of course, and had resulted in 2 small children that he was in the position of having to try to take care by himself. And I really admire him for that. And I'll continue with what my grandmother said directly. It said, it was a bad time for George. After a few years, he met Frances, and along with her children from a previous marriage, they combined their families. Then Kim came along. So we're real happy about that. No matter what has gone on in the life of Yreka, George has had a part in it. Everyone loves him, everyone is proud of him, and he is my, quote, favorite cousin. So obviously my grandmother thought very much about George, respected him, always enjoyed when he came over to visit. So that's my memory. Thank you. The next person.
I wasn't expecting. I didn't have anything really prepared other than what I have in my mind. And I thank you so much for coming. I mean, this is very heartwarming, especially as George Wacker's, I'm one of the granddaughters. And just to see the beautiful turnout and see all your faces and listen to you laugh of our silly stories that we have to share. But it brings his spirit alive. And I do say every time I come to Yreka, I do feel like my grandfather's spirit is, around. And I think that's because we all sort of carry that with us. And, what he said and what he did are wonderful memories, but how he made us feel was even more so. And I think that if anything I can try to do in my life and my career is to carry that with me and sort of have that light, which I do feel like is still very much alive, especially in this room today. So I have a lot of stories, and I think one of the funny things is my grandfather did kind of have a dark sense of humor. When my sister and I, we come and stay with them for a week during the summer, and I looked forward to it because we go to Greenhorn Park, we would do the Vacation Bible School, we would eat ice cream after every dinner. We'd have ice cream and really cut up pineapple and fruit in the mornings and Eggo waffles. I mean, it felt like I was just, it's the way every grandparent should treat their grandchild, as far as I'm concerned. But it was also the little tiny pranks that Grandpa would pull on us. And maybe that's where I get my dark sense of humor, but we would, he'd have our room situated, and they'd say, go ahead and bring your stuff up in your room, you're staying in the room. And so, or he wouldn't tell me, I'd just go up in the room normally at the end of the day, and he'd have a mannequin head in our bed. Or one time he had this stand-up poster, and it was a girl taking a picture. I think it was like a Polaroid advertisement. I don't know where he had it. It's kept it in a closet somewhere. But I opened the door, and there she was with her camera, and it's about this tall, and, I screamed, and he would always be close by to make sure he saw the reaction. So, those are just kind of those fun memories. But aside of that, it was, just his kindness and his kindness that he shared to everybody. It was not just limited to certain people or certain class or whatever. It was everybody that got to experience that. And thank you all for coming today. It was wonderful to see you. Okay.
can open it up to anyone. If anyone has a memory that they'd like to share, come on up. I do have to add, though, that life-size poster of the girl with the camera, he used that a lot. One time in high school, I had a boy coming to pick me up, asked to use the bathroom. He went in, and I hear this, ah! And my dad had it sitting in the bathtub right behind him where he could see the reflection in the mirror of a girl like that. That was the last time he picked me up for anything, too. You know. Is there if there's anyone else who would like to share?
My name is Margot Madden, and I'm married to Kenny Madden. His father, my father-in-law, bought Wacker's Grocers from George, and I know that the things that Don tried to keep going in the store were things that George had started, and he did not want those to go away. And I'm thankful for that, because all the years that Don had it, he was loved too. But he learned a lot of those things from George. So I'm thankful. And something we learned today was the magic tricks. So Kenny goes, yeah, he taught Dad those magic tricks. And especially if you were a younger person going into the store, he always did the money tricks with you. And I thought that was kind of a cool thing to learn today. And so I'm just thankful that you had this to share with all of us today.
Is there anyone else? Good.
Okay, I grew up 3 houses away from George, and so I'm not related, but I'm Doncaster, and there are 2 things. Number one, my husband was hired to teach at the elementary school, and I stayed home the first year we came back here, and with our youngest son. And the next year I applied to teach at Yreka. Well, at that time they had a rule that they would not hire couples or anyone who was related as teachers. And George stood up and said, when they discussed me, and said that it was about time they got rid of that rule. And they did. And so since then, we were both hired, and we stayed here forever until we retired. And there were several other local families who also taught in Yreka as couples. So that was one thing. And then no one has mentioned the letters. I'm sure Judy probably got some, but whenever you appeared in the newspaper, then George hand wrote a card to you, which you got in the mail. And I fortunately were in the papers from time to time, and so were our sons, and he did that the rest of his life, as far as I remember. But it was handwritten, personal congratulations, whatever happened, whether it was a scholarship or a sports type of thing or whatever. But George was always special to us because he was just a neighbor, and he always knew you and whatever age you were. So anyway, that's it.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes. Judy Washington, I didn't describe her very well. My cousin Ron Washington, you probably know Ron, Judy Washington, and Ron would be second cousins, I guess, with George.
Norma's mom. Can you hear me without this? No. My husband's mother and Mike's grandmother were sisters. So I'm really not related except by marriage. But George and Francis and Kim and Norma Lee and the boys and John were backdoor neighbors to my family. So we had known them forever. We knew them from church. And we loved Kim because we could go borrow her and bring her over to our house and play. And she had the best giggle of any kid you could ever imagine. She was so much fun to be around. But everything that was said here today about George is true. He was wonderful, and he was a gentleman. Always he was a gentleman. And I worked for him as a kid before I married into the family. I kept books for his egg business, and Kim talked about that earlier. And I helped make the Christmas wreaths. And I ended up one time working at a counter by the meat slicer. And I got in a hurry, so I was putting stuff together and putting it here and picking up stuff and putting it there. And I sliced my hand on the meat cutter. And George was there immediately and kept me from fainting and was a true gentleman and kind through the whole silly mistake on my part. But I want to say this, and I mentioned it earlier. He was the true gentleman. And he would have been that no matter where he'd grown up or wherever he lived. And we all are richer because of him. And I thank you too for being here. And I'm happy to be part of this family, even though I had to marry into it. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe toward the end of this part, but I wanted to say something beyond George, I think, just about the Wacker family. I mean, I don't know about you folks, but I think this is amazing that grandkids would come from around. I mean, it shows this was a very strong family. And in nowadays, I think that they need to be given a hand. More than that, they just need to be appreciated for who they are. So I'll give them a hand. I think we have some time if we want to just stick around and in small groups and talk. And there's time to do that. Is there anything else, Kim, that you wish to say? No? Anyone? Kim? Oh, good. Claudia East. She always has some good words of wisdom.
I just wanted to tell everyone thank you for being here. I'm on the board with several other board members that are here today for Yreka Preservation. And we do have some information in the back. I want you to be sure and see Jennifer Bryan if you want to pick up one of these books. I'm sure she'd be glad to sell one to you. There's some newsletters and some other material, but I also want to let you know that Mike gives wonderful tours, and there's a 3-fold brochure back there that has the list for this year. So you might want to pick one of those up so you can visit Yreka or some of the outlying areas. He has new tours this year that I think are really great, and we appreciate all that Mike does. And I want to thank him personally for helping generate this activity today. So anyway, thank you very much, and I hope everybody enjoys our chilly spring.